It's Tuesday, May 24th. Tonight, we review the North Carolina Senate's budget proposal and hear from legislative leaders and policy watchdogs on North Carolina Now.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Good evening, I'm Kelly McCullen and welcome to North Carolina Now. Tonight we'll focus on the North Carolina Senate's newly released budget bill. The proposal cuts spending, expires temporary taxes, and reduces income tax rates. The Senate budget bill calls for $19.4 billion in state spending while setting aside about $72 million. It estimates about $60 million in new revenues will be generated from new court fees and diverts $67 million from the Golden Leaf Fund. The budget sets aside $57 million to offset the loss of a state tax revenue and reserves $186 million for an upcoming bill Senate Republicans call a jobs package. The temporary sales and income taxes that are scheduled to expire July 1st will expire under this bill. Republicans say that tax sunset will put over $800 million in North Carolinians' pockets. Senate budget writers proposed nearly $1.2 billion in cuts to the state's education budget that funds K-12 community colleges and the university system. The Senate proposes hiring over 1,100 new teachers to lower kindergarten through third grade class sizes so each teacher teaches 17 students, not 18 students per class. Only teaching assistants working in kindergarten classrooms would maintain state-funded jobs in the Senate budget bill. Teacher assistants in higher grades must be funded with local school revenue, if at all. The Senate would stop funding more than one school system in any county. City school system funding would be completely eliminated. Assistant principals funding would be cut 21%. Central office administrators would have their office budgets sliced 16%. Local school systems would be phased into purchasing their school buses using local school revenue. The More at 4 program is scheduled to receive a 20% reduction in the Senate budget, with the program transferring from the Department of Public Instruction to the Department of Health and Human Services. The residential schools that serve the deaf and blind would face mandatory consolidation from 3 campuses into 2 campuses. The budget makes no demand on which campus closes in the merger. The Senate's budget plan for community colleges looks much like the House's budget. The student enrollment growth is fully funded. The Senate gives the state board the flexibility to cut $53 million as long as those cuts do not affect displaced worker training. Community college tuition would jump $10 per credit hour, the same as in the House budget bill. The community college system could increase fees for taking the GED test. Changes to how high-cost curricula are funded would save another $22 million. The college system overall would reduce its spending by nearly $120 million. The UNC system would absorb nearly $359 million in net spending cuts under the Senate budget plan, leaving it with a $2.5 billion budget. The Senate would fully fund university enrollment growth, but require the UNC Board of Governors to slash $434 million. The Senate budget would not allow for across-the-board cuts. UNC Hospital's annual subsidy is reduced in the Senate budget bill by 43% to $25 million. The House budget bill eliminates the entire subsidy. UNC-TV's budget is cut $1.4 million in 2011, about 12%, to $10.5 million. The network would undergo a continuation review of its operations. The results of that review will dictate how much state funding UNC-TV receives in 2012 and beyond. UNC-TV currently receives about 45% of its budget from the General Assembly. The NC Senate budget boosts funding for East Carolina's dental school, the UNC System's Building Reserve Fund, and North Carolina A&T and UNC Greensboro's Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering. The Department of Health and Human Services faces $479 million in spending reductions, leaving it a $4.4 billion budget. The Early Childhood Program Smart Start would see a 20% spending reduction. That's $37 million. How mental health agencies are funded and operate would be reformed. Republicans say there are efficiencies here that could save tens of millions of dollars without affecting services. The Senate budget would direct nearly $33 million from the Health and Wellness Trust Fund to Health and Human Services. That money would let DHHS offer grants to fight teen tobacco use, boost medication assistance programs, and offset rate cuts for doctors accepting Medicaid patients. Pharmacy services would be gleaned for efficiencies with emphasis placed on dispensing more generic drugs. Savings must be found in optional and mandatory Medicaid services totaling $16 million, or some optional services could be reduced or eliminated. The Senate budget does not offer inflationary increases for Medicaid providers that could save almost $63 million. State agencies falling under the Senate Environment and Natural Resources budgets will see many cuts, but some agencies will see budget increases. The Departments of Agriculture and Commerce would see net increases while being directed to cut spending other places. The Rural Economic Development Center and Wildlife Resources Commission would each receive $16 million in budget increases under the Senate proposal. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources, it would be cut $21 million. The Clean Water Management Trust Fund would be reduced from $100 million to $12.5 million. The Employment Security Commission would be merged with the Department of Commerce. The Senate budget would boost the One North Carolina Fund by $10 million. Tourism marketing would be cut by $1 million. Job positions and operating expenses are slashed throughout these budgets. The Senate budget saves $13 million by eliminating vacant court jobs. Hiring and salaries would also be frozen in the courts by the Senate budget. Drug treatment courts would be eliminated and the family court would be reviewed. A new State Department of Public Safety would be created by merging the SBI, State Crime Lab, and the Departments of Juvenile Justice, Crime Control and Public Safety, and the Department of Correction. The merger will eliminate jobs, but overall, Senate Justice and Public Safety budget receives a $25 million increase. The Senate's budget plans for general government operations propose $50 million in total reductions, with 447 job positions eliminated. The Department of Cultural Resources would see an $11 million reduction. The Department of Revenue, $10.1 million. The Workers' Compensation Fund will be reduced by one-time $2.2 million. The Department of Insurance's budget, however, would be increased nearly $3 million. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger here to talk about the budget. Your budget. Is this budget, your goals and philosophy all rolled into one big bill?
Kelly, there's a lot of that. There's certainly promises kept as far as the campaign is concerned. We talked about balancing the budget without raising taxes. We talked about allowing temporary taxes to sunset. We talked about reforming education. We talked about a number of other things, and much of that is rolled into the budget.
Many Democrats and skeptics and opponents who will be on this show say they're targeting that education funding. You're eliminating teacher assistants, but you're also offering to hire 1,100 school teachers. How will that work in those elementary school grades?
You know, first of all, what we are doing is we are funding K-12 education at a higher level than the House budget. The other thing that we're doing is we're adding 1,100 teachers in grades 1, 2, and 3. We are eliminating a number of positions in K-12 education, but we're doing all of this, as you know, within the context of a $2.5 billion shortfall. And in education, what we're looking at is reforming education. We've looked at the results that we've received in education over the past several years. We see graduation rates where fully 1/3 or nearly 1/3 of our ninth graders don't graduate from high school. We see remedial classes in the university system and remedial classes in the community college system where folks that graduate from our public high schools have to take remedial classes when they get to college. We see third graders where fully 23% of the third graders are not reading at grade level. So we see a real need for changes in public education, and we're doing that.
Well, the debate says when schools are struggling, you give them more money. This budget goes in reverse. If you're asking North Carolinians to watch their school budgets get cut, what are you giving them back in terms of reform and new philosophy you think will work under the reduced funding?
Well, we're giving back a system that's geared to having kids reading by the time they finish the 3rd grade. And the studies are telling us that the way to do that is to have a smaller class in grades 1, 2, and 3 and have a highly qualified teacher in those classes. So that's one of the things we're doing. We are changing the funding formula for grades 1, 2, and 3 so that we are funding more teachers for those classrooms, 1,100 more teachers in the first year. Ultimately, the goal is to get those class sizes down to 1 to 15. The other thing we're doing in order to ensure that we've got highly qualified teachers is we are in the first year of the biennium funding the development of a pay-for-performance plan for teachers. And in the second year of the biennium, we are funding that pay-for-performance plan.
Merit pay.
Merit pay. We've talked about it for a long time. A lot of folks have talked about it. We're finally getting it done.
Philosophically, there's a penny out there you could claim as a sales tax and bring in $800 million. You, Speaker Tom Tillis, say no way. Why is that penny so important to you as a leader?
Because it's not a penny. It's $1 billion. It's $1 billion out of the pockets of individuals in North Carolina. It's $1 billion out of small businesses in North Carolina. It's $1 billion that the economists tell us will create 11,000 jobs. So what we're saying is let's leave that $1 billion in the hands of the people. Let's let the people make the decision about how to spend that money. Let's allow that spending of that $1 billion to help us create jobs, which really is the #1 priority for us and I think for the people of our state.
Perfect setup for the next question. Senator Fletcher Hartsell calls this proposal, the Senate budget, a shot in the arm to the economy. When and how will North Carolinians see the effects of this budget once it's passed, if it's passed in its form?
Well, one way they'll see it is beginning July 1, they'll see the sales tax go down. That's a shot in the arm for people and for small businesses. Another way they'll see it is when some North Carolinians do their tax returns, because we're looking at rate reductions at all levels. We're looking at the expiration of the temporary surtaxes. We're looking at that as a significant shot in the arm for the people of the state, ultimately a shot in the arm for the economy.
Senator Phil Berger, thanks for being on.
Thank you, Kelly.
Senate Minority Whip Josh Stein spoke with us around noon today about the Senate budget bill and gave us his opinion.
I'm extremely concerned about what the Republicans have put out in our Senate budget. It's going to cut education $1.2 billion, taking 10% out of K-12 community colleges and our public universities, on top of a couple years where we've had to make some tough cuts because of prior budget cuts. And I'm afraid they're cutting the bone with this budget.
Senate Minority Leader Martin Nesbitt is Josh Stein's colleague in the Senate. He says on this show, you're cutting into the bone at this point with some of this spending cut proposals. What do you think?
I think we're dismantling the state of North Carolina. That's really what's happening. The Republican way of doing business is to cut the money off and let it implode. And we're starting with the public schools and working our way on down. I've spent all day learning, and it just keeps coming. In mental health, we've spent 10 years rebuilding that to a level that the people were a little bit comfortable with, and they're going in and taking all the credit balances and putting these people to a zero or down to where they can't even make it. So it's bad. It's really bad, and I think the people of this state will respond to it.
The Republican leaders, Senator Phil Berger in this case, say this reflects a philosophy and that their philosophy can work for the state of North Carolina with reduced funding. It's more efficient.
Well, their philosophy is they don't like government. I mean, they're anti-government folks is what they are. Some of them don't like public schools. You've seen that. They've made statements to that effect. They want vouchers in private schools for all the children. And, you know, when you come in and make the choices they're making when they are not necessary, I think that's the thing that people need to understand. It's not necessary to fire all the teachers' aides in grades 1, 2, and 3.
But they say they're hiring 1,100 new school teachers, not assistants, to lower classroom sizes, and that will work better.
Well, they didn't bring a teacher to tell us that, and the teachers that we talk to will tell you in a heartbeat that they need those teachers' aides in the class. The lady we had up here a week ago had a kindergarten with 22 students in it. Supposed to have 18, had 22. 4 have English as a second language. 2 are ADD. 10 have personal learning plans because they have a disability of some sort on learning. They're divided into 4 learning groups because of their diversity. And we're going to put one teacher in front of that class and say, now you take care of them all? And she made it very clear that having those aides to be able to give these children individual instruction is the only way you're going to educate all the children.
Looking at the budget, it includes some income tax reductions, sunsets of temporary taxes. Fletcher Hartzell called it a shot in the arm for the economy, this proposal. What do you call it?
Well, they're fixing to fire 20 to 30,000 people. I mean, that's the number of positions that'll be lost out there, which are good jobs located in every community. They're going to turn around and try to stimulate the economy with tax cuts for small business, which will stimulate the economy where there's business. But you get out into some of these areas of the state and there is no business, there are no jobs. We've got over 40,000 unemployed people that have been out there for over a year and a half, most of them from small towns in eastern North Carolina and western North Carolina, where there are no jobs. And giving a tax break out there is not going to do the deal. We'd be much better off to keep the teachers and the school personnel employed, educate the next generation, and let them build out of it, because those people will be putting money into the economy that small businesses can survive on.
Do you look at this Senate budget and see areas where you could work, areas you could support, or do you throw your hands up at this one and say, let's hope for something later in negotiations?
When you see the dismantling of these different facilities that we have out here, it's kind of stunning.
Senator, we have a few more steps in the negotiation process. Hope you'll be back on to share your insight as the bill gets tweaked and twisted and negotiated.
Well, thank you. I'll be glad to come back.
Governor Beth Perdue released a statement as well this afternoon regarding the Senate budget proposal. She says, quote, "This state was built on providing a quality education for all North Carolinians. Let me be clear. It's a core part of who we are and what we value as a people. I've seen the House budget and I'm reviewing the Senate budget. If they pass a budget that undermines our schools and fails to protect the quality of our education system, then I will have no other choice but to veto it." Matt Willoughby with Civitas Institute joins us. Matt, the governor's pretty clear. They pass a budget that looks anything like the Senate proposal. She's going to veto it. Is that going to happen?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen. What the Senate came out was a little different from the House budget, a little bit different. And they actually spelled out the tax cuts. You remember in the House budget, you had a line called reserved for finance. It was a tax cut package with no details, and they set aside $230 million in the first year of the biennium and $404 or $405 million in the second year, but we didn't know how they were going to get there. But the Senate spells out. They do an across-the-board personal income tax cut, and that's a little over $186 million each year, and plus some other deductions, some other tax cuts in there, and they call it their job creation package. And Senator Ruccio, during a press conference, was mentioning a UNC study seemed to indicate there'd be a creation of 20,000 jobs in the immediate future, and maybe 50 to 60,000 over a span of time with this tax cut package. Now, while they didn't cut the corporate tax, that is still a possibility, since the House didn't spell out how they would cut their taxes. They could still come up with a corporate tax cut. So that's still out, and we both know probably what's going to happen is the Senate's going to send it back over to or send it to the House. The House won't concur. It'll go into a conference, and you'll come out with a final version that the governor will veto. And then you're going to have a continuing resolution. And if you remember, they already sent her one that she vetoed anyway. So we may be headed for a stalemate.
What's the climate down here? You've been here many a year. Mm-hmm. Is it rough down here if you're a lawmaker trying to cut a deal?
I think it is, yeah. When you have a Republican-controlled legislature and a Democrat in the governor's mansion, you've seen it already. It's tense. Do you want to build a veto-proof support for a bill, or do you want to force her to veto? And so you can use that to run against her in 2012.
most pundits and most lawmakers are focusing on education funding, not the small or the 0.5% income tax reduction. What do you make of the education funding in this budget?
Well, the Senate spends a little bit more on public schools and universities, cuts a little bit on the community colleges. Now the Democrats are saying that the senators are cutting teacher assistants. That's a little misleading in that what they're doing is they're funding it at the level of kindergarten classes and giving LEAs, the local districts, the flexibility to still fund other teacher assistant positions with some other funds. It's just that they're basing the funding for teacher assistants on a smaller group. So that's the big thing I think that the governor is going to pick on when she comes up with a reason to veto.
But the school has to use local money if it wants to maintain its ranks of teaching assistants.
They can find
Could the state couldn't outlaw the local government from spending money on that, could they?
Oh, I don't think so. I think they try to give them as much flexibility as, but what they're saying is, here's your target, here's what you're going to do. Now you need to find how you want to do it if you want to do it that way.
Health and Human Services, another agency, another group of the budget that is facing some fundamental reforms. What's your assessment of that? It's a lot of different moving parts here.
Yeah, we'll see where the community care thing goes and how that works out. I mean, some people are saying we're doing something we did, you know, a few years ago that didn't quite work out. We don't know where they're headed with that and how that's going to work out. But I mean, that is such a complicated part when you're dealing with Medicaid and Medicare and all that sort of stuff. It's just way too complicated.
Matt Willoughby, Civitas, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
The Senate's budget bill works off the House budget bill that passed a few weeks ago, but it is different from what House budget writers are proposing. It is understood that Senate leaders will allow its members to offer amendments to the budget bill that rolled out this morning. So in many small ways, the Senate budget could look different by week's end. Rob Schofield with North Carolina Policy Watch joins us. The governor says if the Senate passes this bill or anything comes out of this legislature that looks like that bill, she has no choice but to veto it.
I don't think any of us are surprised by that, Kelly. It's what we expected. The budget that the Senate has proposed it differs slightly from what the House came up with, but for the most part, they've just sort of gussied up what was a flawed proposal, and that was fundamentally different what the governor said she had to have. So I don't think her response is surprising, and I think it's appropriate.
What do you make of the income tax reduction? That's one of the highlights of this bill. I think a few percentage points, you know.
They've tweaked it a little bit. I think the only people that are really going to notice it are rich people, because actually their taxes are going to go down 0.5% next year with the expiration of that one tax and then reducing a little bit more. They might actually see a few bucks and notice it. People at the bottom and in the middle aren't going to notice it at all. All they're going to notice is the reduction in services that it's going to lead to.
Education funding, of course, about 60% of the budget, and every lawmaker today down here is focused on the education budget. If you looked over it for the Senate version, does it differ greatly from the House?
They've sort of tweaked things. They're calling it comprehensive education reform, but I don't think it amounts to that. They've put a few more teachers in the lower grades, but they've cut a lot more teachers' assistants. For the most parts, it's across-the-board cuts that are going to be felt in the classroom. We're going to see dark classrooms, fewer teachers, kids not doing as well in school generally. And I think we know for a fact that when North Carolina starts going down the ladder to the bottom of the states in the union on spending, it's going to be worse for kids and worse for classrooms. Republicans
will say, though, that as funding has increased in recent years, the results haven't been there out of the public schools. So this is a different philosophy in conjunction with maybe some budget reductions going there of what they may be.
We should have done a lot more for the public schools for years. We've done some incremental stuff. We've fought hard to get some incremental changes, some incremental increases in spending, but we need to do tremendously more than we're doing right now. We ought to be spending 25% more on education in this state. The changes that were made over the last couple of decades have made some small improvements. It wasn't perfect, but going backwards, going back down to say 50th in the country or 49th in the country in spending, we know that's not the recipe for success.
Well, you don't know that's going to do that.
Don't know.
You don't know that it's going to drop that far, do you?
Well,
are you guaranteeing that? I mean, I know, but this is why we have you on, to have your perspective. You think education is going to decline in North Carolina as a result of this budget?
I don't have any doubt about it. I know already that it was struggling. My wife's a high school teacher here in Wake County. I've already seen the struggles that she's had just getting supplies in her class, getting her classroom cleaned. We don't have enough janitors as it is. Now, you cut another $1 billion out of education generally, we're going to have fewer school nurses, fewer janitors, all the things that make for a vibrant school community.
The Senate Republicans say they want to get down to one teacher for every 15 students in a classroom K through 3rd grade. Realistic, can it be done? Will it work?
Well, you can do it over time. They say they're going to do that. That'd be fine. That'd be one little small improvement in the school system. But of course, when you're taking away the teacher's assistants in those grades, it may be a bit of a wash. You may have a net improvement. That's good, but we need to do that all through the system, and that's going to take more money. You're not going to get to the point you need to get in education by cutting spending overall. It's just a recipe for gradual decline and frustration for our teachers and for our kids and parents.
Do you think the state's budget and the Senate proposal, everything other than education, pales in comparison?
The stuff in the cuts in healthcare are pretty scary. I mean, we're talking about cutting off fundamental things like vision care and dental care and respiratory therapy and all those kinds of essential things for disabled people and seniors, people who've had strokes, that kind of service. Why would we be cutting that at a time when the need is through the roof? I think that's another example of really egregious cuts. There are lots of other ones too.
Rob, so much about this budget. Maybe we'll have you back on later when we have a comprehensive, or I should say a consensus bill to go to Governor Perdue.
I think we'll be going for a while.
Thank you, Rob.
My pleasure. Thank you.
As the budget proposal changes and further negotiations continue, we'll follow it. Watch us Friday night on North Carolina Now, Legislative Week in Review for more coverage. We'll see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.